questions throughout the open house. Please share them in chat. We will answer as many questions as we can in our time together, but we also want to capture all the questions as we will provide a written answer to all the questions received today, and we'll post them in a Q&A sort of format on our website as a resource along with today's recorded session. So for our time today together, we'll share briefly about NHEC, but less about who we are and more about the why we are sponsoring the coaching and consulting sessions to support interested applicants for the competition. The bulk of our time will be spent with our partner and program evaluator, Linda Thomas Parker, which I'll introduce in a second, who will share what you can expect at a coaching and consulting session, maybe who on your team may want to consider being there, and materials and resources that you may want to review. At the end, we'll hang on if there's any additional questions, and we'll also share our sign-up link for the coaching and consulting sessions as well. So for those that are new to NHEP or the Native Hawaiian Education Program, it may feel a bit overwhelming with all of these acronyms and how they are connected, so you're not alone. For the Native Hawaiian Education Act, we think of this as our kahua. It's the very foundation of the structure of the program, the funding and legislative mechanism. It establishes the purpose of the Act. Within the Act itself is the Native Hawaiian Education Program, and this is where the funding comes through to provide direct services to our communities. In recent times, we've had the grant competition being held every 3 years, and this year the grant application deadline will be due May 15th. The Native Hawaiian Education Council is also funded through the Act, but it does not provide direct service programming like the program. Instead, its charge is to coordinate, assess, make recommendations, and report on existing Native Hawaiian education programs. So much of our work is really advocating for priority recommendations for funding in the grant competition to the Department of Ed, or each year we advocate for annual appropriations for the Act in order to fund more and more programs. In addition to that, we also advocate for language within the Act. For example, asking for facilities assistance, that the funds can be used for construction and renovation or modernization for schools or structures, public schools or structures where we have a predominantly Native Hawaiian students that are being served. So these are the types of things that we advocate for. Our focus is always going to be on the programs and the community and what more we can do to support their success. So why is NHEC providing this opportunity for interested applicants? In the past 2 years, we've offered this to current grantees with positive feedback. And as we prepared for the announcement of the competition, we wanted to expand the support for Native Hawaiian community-based programs and other communities doing really innovative and deep work in education that may not necessarily be aware of the grant competition opportunity or may not have as many access to resources as other larger institutions may do. So our biggest why for doing this is, again, our opportunity to advance that awareness with our community-based organizations, making sure that they have some support in getting ready for applying if they're interested. Because we know with community wealth that education doesn't stop. At the end of the day, when the bell rings, it's 24/7 for our keiki. It's all of these programs that do that and support that learning continuum. So we find that to be part of that larger community wealth. And I think our larger outcome, and as I say this, I'm looking at Linda thinking that we should probably talk about this in our own NHEP logic model, is our success narratives. For the Department of Ed, they'll look at your annual performance reviews or your GEPRA, which is your government rated performance of measures of how you're performing. But we know that many of the programs, if not all, have such amazing outcomes with culturally relevant assessment. They may not necessarily be captured. We want to make sure that we have more control of how we manage and share that success narrative with everyone. So as we get prepared to share out this opportunity with you, we wanted to have some questions that you might want to reflect on before you engage in coaching and consulting to consider. And so we ask you to think about where you are on your journey with your program. Are you stewardship ready? Meaning your organization has experience in the past or knows how to manage a federal grant, or you have infrastructure in place to do so. Are you program ready? Does your program have established goals, or are you in your implementation phase? Maybe you've run a pilot with a program and now you want to scale it, or you have an existing program and you want to scale it to a different community. And think about also, are you outcome ready? Meaning your program is ready to measure and identify what outcomes can be achieved. So these are the types of things we ask for you to reflect on as we begin to engage on this opportunity for you. Our quick timeline for coaching and consulting, our open house today to kind of share what you can expect and things that you want to reflect on and how you want to prepare for the coaching consulting sessions. April 11th is when the coaching and consulting sessions begin. And these are first come, first serve. So as many as NHEC can sponsor will do so. The sessions will be open for sign up via a link that we'll share with you at the end until May 9th when the sessions end. And we felt this was important since the deadline comes up on May 15th. So that's sort of our timeline here that we'll share. With that, I'm so excited to turn this time over to our friend and partner and program evaluator, Linda Toms Barker. We've worked with her for the past 2 years for coaching and consulting with our current grantees, but even outside of that, with many of our research evaluation studies that we've done, Linda is very well versed in the Native Hawaiian Education Program, in working with grantees of the program. She understands and has worked with the U.S. Department of Education and other research evaluation projects. And she hails from Hilo, Hawaii, so I don't know what more I can say. So please join me in a warm welcome for Linda Toms Barker.
Thank you very much, Elena, for your warm welcome. I'll just mention a couple things. Yes, theoretically, I'm retired. I'm not very good at retiring. So I'm also continuing to serve as a consultant to the current evaluation of the 2020 cohort of grants. And I also I thought your comment about success narratives was really important. And so I wanted to mention something about my philosophy as a program evaluator. I think a lot of people are afraid of evaluation because it has the word value in it, as if, we're valuing you and what you do. That's not how I think about evaluation. I don't think the interesting program evaluation question is, does it work? I think those of you out there in the field doing this work, it works. That's why you're doing it. So the real questions we want to answer are, how does it work and how well does it work? And how do we know that it's working well and how can it work better? And so I think a focus on success stories is an important part of this evaluation. Next slide. Thank you. All right, so what do we mean by coaching and consulting? Basically, you get an hour of my time. And in the past, a few lucky people might have even gotten another hour of my time if it turned out that that was going to be of value and I was available. You're going to schedule using the Calendly app. And as Elena mentioned, she'll get you the link at the end of the session today. And you're going to think about who else on your team you think would be valuable to include in that conversation. And you're going to do some preparation before we talk. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So that we can make the best possible use of that time. I want to actually also mention what not to expect. So I will not edit your grant application for you. I will not do your research on need or your research on evidence of effective practice. But what I can do is help you clarify your objectives, help you think about how to measure those things, and help you with your logic model, which is an important part of the application process these days, is to have a solid logic model that not only wins you the grant, but that you guys believe in and can work from, because it can really help guide the implementation of your program. Next slide, please. So now the term grant announcement, grant application, there's lots of language out there. For this particular program, it's called an NIA, which stands for Notice Inviting Applications. So if you see that acronym NIA, that's what it's referring to. And it's important that you review the application before we talk. There's lots of really good information in there that will help you reflect on how to build your design. Also, the council has put together a resource page with all sorts of valuable resources that will help you as you think about your grant application. So take a look at what's on that page. And one of the things I believe that's on there, for example, is the requirements for how to do your annual performance report. Now, that might seem like we don't really need that information yet, but it's helpful to look at because it will give you some guidance on the kinds of information you're going to be required to report, which will help you think about the kinds of data you need to collect. And then it will be important to start thinking about your objectives and how you're going to measure whether you've accomplished them or not. Think about the kinds of questions you have. Think about who should be included in our session. And if possible, send me something you'd like me to look at before we talk to give me a little bit of background. You could send me a brief description of your program design, or you could send me a list of objectives or a first shot at a logic model, whatever stage you're in. If you send me something in advance, I can be more prepared and focused when we talk. I'm hoping everybody knows where to find the grant announcement, the NIA. It will be on the resources page on the council's website. You can also just Google Native Hawaiian Education Program Grant, and you will end up on the Department of Education website, and it will take you through a variety of links and eventually get you there. One of the things you'll find on that Department of Education website is a webinar that they recorded, I think it was the 23rd of March, which is their instructions about what to think about and how to get ready to do their grant. So as you review, let's go on to the next page. We're going to sort of do a get ready, get set, go here. As you review that NIA, there are a number of things to focus on. First of all, you've got to think about and make sure you understand the eligibility for these grants. There's very detailed language in the NIA explaining what kinds of organizations are eligible to apply. So make sure that you're eligible. And then there are a list of funding priorities. And you'll be asked in your grant application to identify which priorities your program addresses. Please, you don't have to address them all. Well, I've seen grant applications that claim they're addressing every single priority, and then you go and read what they're actually doing, and it's a bit of a stretch. We really don't have to address them all. Try to stay focused. Okay, what are we actually doing here, and which priority or priorities are we addressing? They're going to ask you if you have an indirect rate agreement. And there are procedures for obtaining an indirect rate agreement. If you need to be charging overhead within your organization on your grant, you'll need an indirect rate agreement. Make sure you take a look at that. If you don't have an indirect rate that's been approved by the federal government, you can charge for a small amount of administrative cost, and you can put the rest of it all indirect. So things like rent and so on, they could be part of your indirect rate. But if you don't have an indirect rate, you can charge for the rent directly as a line item. The thing to keep in mind is that there is a limit for administrative costs of about 5%. So anyway, that's just something to look into before you go to try to fill out your grant application, is to make sure you know where you are on that. The other thing is that you're going to be applying online through grants.gov, and you'll be managing your grant with them, all your payments and reporting and everything, through something called the Systems for Rewards Management, or SAM. And so you have to register for those, and they recommend that you do it early because it could take 5 days or more to complete and get for those two different platforms. So look into that early. Another thing I wanted to mention is, for the first time, all grantees, anybody receiving any federal funding, is responsible for the Build America, Buy America Act. It doesn't really affect the Native Hawaiian Education Program much. It's really about bricks and mortar and making sure your iron and your steel and all those things come from the US of A. But it's a good thing to take a look at. And there is a description of all of that and how it might affect these grants in the Department of Education's webinar that's on their webpage. All right. Oh, the other thing to mention also is this SAM, the Systems for Rewards Management, now also has a mobile app. And also, just to point out that they're going to, once you register for these programs, they're going to actually assign you a 12-character alphanumeric ID, and you'll be using that in the future instead of your DUNS number. So those are just a few little housekeeping things. All right, so now we're basically ready to dive in. Now we want to get set before we actually launch the thing. One of the pieces of language that they use in this NIA is what they call the rationale for your program. And I want everybody to really think hard about, why do you actually want to do this? And I put that first, which is kind of backwards. You usually think of first, you say, what is the need? And then you say how you're going to address the need. But in my experience, a lot of grantees have a program they want to do. They already know they want to do it, and they want to go get money for it. So I put that first. Why do you want to do your program? Make sure that you're really clear about it. So then you can really focus in on what need your program's addressing, what your proposed solution is to that need or challenge. But the rationale piece of it is, why do you believe that your program or your solution is a strong solution? Is there some evidence out there that you can point to, some rationale you can point to that says, there's a good reason for me to believe that this particular intervention or program component is likely to be effective? It's because we have evidence that addressing this need has had good outcomes in the past, or because there's evidence that this particular strategy has been effective in other settings or whatever. But I think it's important to think about it this way, because I think some of the grant applications that I've read have page after page after page after page, it's like somebody did a term paper on the need with lots and lots and lots of citations. But when it gets to, and then we're going to do this great intervention, they have very little to say about why we think this intervention might actually be effective. So I want to make sure people take a few extra moments to really think about that, because that's what they're really looking for in the rationale. And then identify an evaluator. You're going to be graded. You're going to be rated on your evaluation plan in your grant application. And if you can identify an evaluator before you get the grant written and get them engaged in helping make sure that the kinds of measures you're choosing for your objectives make sense, that your program is evaluable, you're doing something that can be documented, they can help you with defining your logic model. And then the logic model will become their blueprint as evaluators for what they collect and report. So getting your evaluator involved in the grant writing stage and the grant planning stage can be really, really helpful. Now, you are not required to have an independent outside evaluator. You can use someone internal to your organization. As a program evaluator, I will tell you that the more external that person is, probably the more valuable they'll be to you. So if you choose someone from your own organization, better that it's not somebody who is involved in the program day to day, because that sort of independent outside perspective can be really valuable in helping you see things from a different point of view, identifying things that are right in front of you that you're so used to you didn't notice, all of that. So I strongly recommend that you give a lot of thought to the evaluator. And also remember, when you go to do your budget, to budget for your evaluator. If I read a project budget that doesn't mention the evaluator, then I'm a little suspicious that the project director is really doing all that work, and they may not actually be taking advantage of their evaluator. So it's helpful to make sure you budget for that. You will find a list of examples of program evaluators that grantees have been using or have used in the past on the council's resource page. That is not a list of recommendations or endorsements. Those evaluators are not equally good. They're just a list of who they are and some way to contact if you really need a starting place for trying to find someone that might evaluate your program. All right, let's go on to the next slide. The last thing I'd mentioned on the previous was develop your logic model. I mean, obviously, those of you that have current grants are familiar with this, because this is, in the last couple of years, something the department's been focusing on. This is kind of a simplified overview of what a logic model is. It says, these are the kinds of things you want to do. You're going to need certain resources or inputs in order to operate that program. And if you have those resources and inputs, then you'll be able to use those to accomplish your planned activities. And if you are able to accomplish those planned activities, then you'll hopefully deliver the amount of product or service or whatever that you intended. So you'll have these outputs. They don't tell you the effectiveness of the program, but those outputs do sort of measure the results of the direct results of the activity. And then if you accomplish all those activities to the extent you intended, you reach the number of participants you hope to, the number of courses you intended to deliver, the number of hours of service, etc. If you're able to accomplish those, then you can expect your participants will benefit in certain ways. And then ultimately, if those benefits are achieved, then there'll be some kinds of important major long-term change. That's sort of a quick overview of what we mean by a logic model. Now, some of you might look at that and say, well, isn't that a theory of change? Yes, that's another term for it. They're not completely identical, but the important thing is that there's logic to it. So you'll notice that in this example, they're all if-then statements. If this happens, then that's what we expect. If this happens, then that's what we expect. And if you read it from left to right, it should be very logical and make a lot of sense. Go on to the next slide. So some people start doing their logic model with a table like this. The diagram approach is nice and the arrows are helpful. But basically, what you're doing is you're saying, okay, this is what we're going to need to get it done. Here are the activities we're planning on accomplishing. Here's our evidence of service delivery or implementation. Those are the outputs. And then we expect the following kinds of change over what time period. The department wants you to think about both short-term and medium-term outcomes. Short-term could be at the end of each semester. It could be at the end of your grant year. It depends on the type of program you have, what short-term means versus medium-term. The impact, the long-term outcomes, they do not expect you to measure. They want to know what you think those are, because that's your logic or your justification for the outputs and the short and medium-term outcomes. But they don't necessarily expect you to measure. The impact, the long-term outcomes will be things like major changes in organizations and communities and service systems. And they're not expected to be measurable within the short time period of a 3-year grant. But it's important that you identify and specify what those are so that there's a clear logic to the whole approach. Next slide. So this is very small, and I'm sorry, I know that makes it a little hard to read. I'm not expecting you to actually read it. But what I wanted to mention is that we use this approach to help the council think through what a logic model might be for the Native Hawaiian education program as a whole. And so we have some examples here, the inputs, the resources, besides grant funding. Some of these programs have partners. Those could be resources. Their cultural knowledge of resources. There's a variety of things that are inputs into this. And obviously, some of the programs are focusing on early childhood, some are K-12, post-secondary. We've got adult activities where some of the grants are focusing on teacher professional development or on assisting parents. And so obviously the types of activities and outputs and short versus medium versus long-term outcomes would be different for different populations, possibly. We're suggesting that when you're thinking about short and medium, long-term outcomes, and you're not quite sure, should I be looking at a horizon of 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, what should I be looking at? Unless there's something about your program design that's compelling to do it in a different way, such as one semester at a time or one 12-week course at a time, it might be useful to think of short-term as being during maybe the first year of the grant period, and medium term maybe by the end of the grant period, and then long-term would be beyond. All right, next slide. So if you've gotten this far, where you've really figured out what you want to accomplish, you figured out how you're going to do it, you figured out how you're going to measure what difference things make, what your short and medium term outcomes are that you're going to have stated targets for, and so on, then you're ready to go. Well, you're almost ready to go. The next step, of course, would be to plan a realistic budget. Now, just so you know, there's about $33 million available for this competition. In the past, grants have ranged from roughly $400,000 to 1.3 million per year. It's a lot of money. And there is nothing saying you can't ask for a lot. You don't have to go for the smallest amount. That doesn't make you more competitive if you ask for less. What you need to do is ask for enough money to do what you're planning on doing. But you also need to tackle a manageable size project for your organization. If your organization has a budget of less than $1 million, you probably don't want to ask for 1.3 million a year, because they're not going to believe you're actually got the infrastructure there to manage something that large effectively and responsibly. So you're going to have to try to look at very specifically, what are you taking on? Is it realistic to staff it? Are you going to be able to find the staff you need for it? The number of times I've seen grants that were very ambitious and they ended up not being able to spend all their money because they couldn't hire the people or couldn't hire them on time, or things took longer. So just try to be as realistic as you can. As long as your budget specifies how the dollars are to be spent, in my experience, the department does not appear to be strongly opinionated about the budget. It needs to be well explained. This is where the money is going to go. And they don't do a lot of, are you sure you need that money to do this? That's not the way they look at the budget. They want to make sure that it's very clear where all the dollars are going. Now, as far as the competition goes, they're saying they're expecting somewhere between 25 and 83 grants. Wow, that's a huge spread. That's because there's no specified dollar amount, and it totally depends on how much the winning applicants have asked for. The other thing to know is that there will be a list of applicants that do not get funded, but who have met all the criteria for funding. And in the next year, instead of having another grant competition, they'll go back to this one and they'll fund the next ones on the list. And they may do that again the following year as well. So do your best with your proposal. If you don't get funded, don't get discouraged. A lot of grantees get a big surprise when they get contacted after the competition's over. Sometimes it's not even following years. Sometimes it's just a few months later. And they're told, guess what? You just got funded. So that's kind of how this process works. Now, as I mentioned, you're going to be doing this, administering the grant online. You want to submit the full application a couple days early if you can, just in case there's any difficulties with uploading, and you know how technology is. You're going to need access to current and ongoing financial data. If you're a small organization where you don't have a full-time financial manager, and you've got a part-time CPA who comes in and looks at your books, you're going to have to sit down with them and make sure that you're going to be able to get enough of their time, that you're going to be able to provide the kinds of financial data that's going to be needed. And then your annual performance reports are also going to be submitted online every year. So do a little planning in advance to make sure you're clear who's responsible for doing the online part of this. And then another component of your application is what they call the management plan. So once you've blown them away with your rationale and the need and the evidence that your design is the best, and you've got a wonderful set of objectives and a logic model that makes perfect sense, and it's all really strong, you also have to explain to them how you're going to implement it in a way that makes effective use of funds. Who's responsible for what tasks? You have to lay out what your staffing is and all the roles and responsibilities of each member of your team, so that they can see that you've got the depth to do this work. You do not necessarily have to have a person in every slot. It is okay to say, this is what the curriculum manager is going to do, or whatever it is, and this is how we're going to recruit that person. You don't necessarily have to have every slot filled, but you do need to understand what the roles and responsibilities are going to be for each of those components of your program. So that's sort of a general overview. And at this point, I would be thrilled if you guys all have questions for me and or Elena and Erica.
Hi, I have a question, Linda.
Hi, Lahua.
Hi, I remember seeing you, I think, on some of our NHEP trainings for current grants. stuff like that. And
Yeah.
thank you guys for hosting this training. I was just reflecting back on logic model. And so in previous logic models for this grant application, we also had to show assumptions, or some of us use things in logic models like showing assumptions and challenges. And I noticed in your logic model example, we don't need to use those. So I was just wondering if you had any input on using those components of other logic models, assumptions and challenges in particular.
I think assumptions and challenges will really strengthen your application, but I would address them in the narrative and not in a diagram.
I love it because that takes up so much space in the diagram.
Well,
so.
And it's not just that, but with this particular grant program, they have just sort of this prescribed thing they're looking for, and they don't want to think about it. So keep the actual model, the diagram itself, just to the components that they're asking for. But I think addressing assumptions and challenges in the narrative when you describe your logic model is a good strength. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. That's great advice. And then I'm not sure if there's another speaker, but I guess my other comment was on the portion about the quality of personnel, because that's something that's a little unique to NHEP as well versus other projects where you write about you have your personnel, but this one really focuses on diversity, minority representation. And so I wasn't sure if there's another speaker to that, or if you guys could just speak on that part, because that's like 10 points of the application right there.
Yeah, that's a good thing for you to highlight. I don't really have a whole lot to say about that. I have definitely in the past seen grant applications that don't address it well at all, and they get funded anyway. One of the tricky things about, and I think on one of these slides, I didn't mention it, but there was this little disclaimer that, and I don't represent the department. We don't work for them. So we're here to try to help everybody be successful, but we can't really speak to exactly how they're looking at things or how they're doing things. The reason that I got involved in this coaching job is because when we were working on studies of the program, our sources of data were to review the grant applications and annual performance reports and evaluation reports of existing grantees and extract data from them. And so I've read them all since 2010. So I know what they look like. And they're obviously all winners because they all have grants. And boy, I'll tell you, it is soup to nuts in terms of what gets funded. It's amazing to me. And in my experience, after 40 plus years of doing this kind of work, this is probably one of the loosest, goosiest grant programs I have ever seen. They're on your side. They want to give you the money. And when they give you the money, they want you to do the work. And if you're having trouble spending it, oh, sure, no problem. You can get an extension. Just tell me how you want to spend it. You want to change your objectives? Okay, write to me and tell me you want to change your objectives, as long as it doesn't change the overall approach. So there's a lot of flexibility on this one. This is not a scary effort. Now, that said, every competition will have probably a different set of grant reviewers. Now, the program director is obviously involved, but she has to pull together a team of people to review these applications. And they have rubrics and all of that. There was a question in here, by the way, about logic model. Yes, not only is there a logic model, but there's also a rubric for how they read and review your logic model that you'll be able to look at. And Elena, I think I might have passed that along to you and Erica already, so it might already be on your resource list. Erica, do you recall if not, we'll make sure it gets up there.
Yes, it's included in that PDF.
Yeah, it's perfect. Yeah, so it'll be on the NHEC resource page. That's great. But yeah, so I read the logic model, and in fact, one of the nice things that they did this last round was they actually gave grantees feedback on their logic model and encouraged the grantees to revise them. There are still logic models that were accepted as the final approved version that I don't think stand up very well to that rubric. So, they're moving in the right direction. But like I say, they're really on your side. They want you to have the money. They're not, super, super tough on you. The fact that they're giving points for the diversity of the staff, I'm glad you noticed that. That's important to note. But I don't think it's a very high bar. I don't know if that's helpful, but
No, it is. And I actually have one more follow-up on the graduation rates and those other statistics that were previously required. Currently there's an organization I worked with that got one that doesn't use any of those data points.
Right.
And just wanted to confirm that it is okay to not have those data points in there, especially for community organizations who really
Absolutely.
don't have the HIPAA access to those.
Exactly.
That. Okay.
So by way of background for everyone else, there is the Government Performance Reporting Act, GEPRA, and every federally funded grant program has GEPRA measures that have to be reported to Congress. And the GEPRA measures for the Native Hawaiian Education Program used to include things like preschool readiness, graduation rates, and so on. At some point, it was acknowledged that the grantees often didn't have access to the data. So the department decided that was okay. Everybody should have objectives in that area, but the department would somehow manage to magically access the data directly from the State Department of Education. And that never happened. The GEPRA measures have now been changed. There is one single GEPRA measure now for this program, and it is the achievement of your objectives. So you have your stated objectives with their targets, and you are responsible for reporting your achievement on those. And those are the measures you're being held accountable for. So as you think about your objectives and your measures and your logic model and all of that, for goodness sake, don't promise anything that you don't want to be held accountable for. Make sure that the measures match what you really feel you can directly influence and that you can easily measure. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay.
Music to my ears. Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else have any questions at this point? Let me see if there were any back in the messages. I don't think so.
Did not see any other additional questions in chat.
Okay, I have one more then. Sorry, you can tell I'm
Go for it.
writing right now.
Go for it.
Actively writing and trying to piece this together. And then I sent who's got a question. Are we allowed to pay apprentices? So people who are working through professional development opportunities, other grants for feds, they don't really like you to pay your apprentices. So is that something that's permissible under this grant if we have a program offering an apprenticeship for workplace study?
I don't know the answer to that question, and I think it's a very reasonable question to ask Joanne. So when you go to the program page,
yeah, I got Joanne's number.
And just go ahead and ask her. I think that's a good question for her.
She's great. I love Joanne. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then we have another question from Kuka Hakalau.
Yeah. Aloha, Mai. Thank you for your
Aloha.
presentation. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Mahalo for your presentation. Very informative. So I have a lot of experience in education, but we just launched a brand new nonprofit.
Congratulations.
And yes, thank you. We've been working on it since 2015. It was sponsored by our social enterprise, but it's become its own nonprofit entity now. But we really don't have any financial track record. And so would you still suggest we should go for it, even though, we just got our nonprofit letter in March. So, but we have, as I said, 35 years of managing federal writing and managing federal grant. We have our social enterprise with a significant yearly budget and all that kind of stuff, which is the same people essentially, or still collaborating together. So the question, should we go for it?
So what is the established entity? What organization is that?
So what we have gotten finally a nonprofit status for is called EA, which stands for Education with Aloha Ecoversity, which is a post-secondary education and career training program for Native Hawaiians, and builds on the success of the Hawaiian charter school movement, but takes it to the next level. And so we officially started working on that concept since 2015, had our first programs in 2020, but it was through a fiscal sponsor and Manini kind of change kind of as far as budget wise and all that kind of stuff.
Well, when you're saying that there's a team of you folks that have lots of this experience, but just not through the new nonprofit, those of you that the team of you, skills, and it's your history and your background that's going to sell this. What organization was that with, that experience?
Well, as of 2017, it was Kuakanaka, which is a social enterprise. And then it was Kanuoka Aina from 2000 till now.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
the first Native Hawaiian charter school, where I wrote millions of dollars managed.
Right.
Yeah,
So the charter school itself is sort of the history that you're building on, right? Yeah. Okay. So I guess my feeling is that you would, it's going to be a little tricky, but you would write it in the sense that says, this is who we are. We are this charter school, this team of folks with this kind of experience, working through this fiscal sponsor. We've had these kinds of grants that we've successfully managed, And this team of people is going to be managing the grant through this new nonprofit. That's sort of how I would tell the story. I think it's worth doing. If you were mostly new people that had just come together to do the nonprofit, I wouldn't do that. But you already know that. That's why you used a fiscal sponsor before, was you realized you needed that track record. So I think you can make the case that you established your track record between the charter school and the fiscal sponsor. Yeah.
Mahalo nui. I really appreciate that. That makes sense. Yeah.
I see no other raised hands or questions in chat. So with that, we just want to mahalo everyone for spending your time with us. We look forward to supporting your endeavor through coaching and consulting and a long-term relationship with the council. We'll stay online if there's any of those that may be a little bit too camera shy that wanted to ask questions. We'll hang on. And for now, we wish you all just a very good day, and mahalo for being with us.
No. I see the question in here from Lahua. Is it okay to reach out to me? And the answer is yes. However, you should know that as a retired person, I'm headed out to follow my dreams. My husband and I are going to be doing some RV travel around the mainland, and I'm going to do these coaching consulting sessions on the road. But sure, you can definitely send me an email if you want to. It's just, I don't know how soon I'll get back to you. If you sign up for a session, I'll be there for sure. Now, I don't know if people actually have my email address. I can put it in here. Right?
And also, just before we close, within the resource document that we'd posted in chat earlier, there is the link for the sign up for the coaching and consulting sessions. So we can repost that again if you've missed it, but it will be there in that PDF, and we'll also repost it again on our website as well.
That was my question.
Yeah, go ahead. You can go ahead with your question if you like.
No, that was the question.
That was it. Oh, that was it.
Okay,
Gotcha.
thank you.
Sure, no worries. Anybody else?
Mahalo anui.
Mahalo nui.
Mahalo nui. Aloha.
Aloha.
We will